Darren and I are agronomists. We are not tax lawyers. So if you're going to be talking about estate planning, shouldn't you be talking to a tax lawyer, Darren?
Well, you know what? I can go talk to a lawyer, and does that lawyer really know anything about farming? Some do, and some are very good, but others really don't understand the intricacies of a farm. So it's kind of nice, I think, to talk to other farmers about estate planning. And hey, what are you doing? How are you trying to be fair with all of your kids? Some farm and some don't. There's all these things that go into it. Also, what if you want to pass the farm on to a grandson because, your son already has his farm, but your grandson wants to get started? There's a lot of different things to think about when you're looking at estate planning on a farm.
Well, one of the reasons why this is so big is because a lot of farmers think about themselves as, well, I've got this family business. It's this little family business. And, I want to pass this on to my son. But a lot of those farmers, they actually have some of the largest businesses in town. And if you're going to pass a large business on to an heir, that's not necessarily the easiest thing to do with all the tax laws and different things that have been changed, especially in Congress here recently.
Well, we were a little bit worried, I have to admit, before the first of the year because this estate planning thing was really going to go a bad direction for us. When we look at it, the estate allowances of how much you could pass on without federal estate taxes were scheduled to go down to just $1 million, and the amount of estate tax on a federal level you were going to be charged if your estate was bigger than $1 million was going to go up to 55%. Well, this would be a huge hit to many farm operations and cause a great demand for cash to be available from the heirs. All of a sudden, if you have to pay 55% of everything over $1 million, and let's just say your estate was worth $5 million, that would be a lot of cash to come up with to pay that estate tax. In many cases, it would force farms to sell some land or to sell some equipment or something just to be able to stay in business. So let's talk about the new rules, the new limits, and how things changed at the end of the year.
Okay, so in December, what the federal government did is they changed the estate tax laws, and here are a couple of things that changed. Specifically, 35% is now the new estate tax rate, and the exemption is $5 million per person, and that's for 2011 and 2012. At this point, for 2013, the exemption is scheduled to go back down to $1 million, and the tax rate is scheduled to go up to a peak rate of 55%. The other big thing that changed in December is this simple question: is the exemption portable between married couples? In other words, if let's say the husband and the wife each have a $5 million exemption, in effect, they could have a $10 million estate. The estate would pay no federal estate taxes. Well, the way the old law used to be was if each person had a $5 million exemption, for example, and the first person died and passed all of his or her property over to the spouse, then that first person completely lost their exemption. If they didn't pass any of that down to their heirs then, they lost their exemption. Well, it's not that way anymore because of this new portability clause in the new estate tax laws.
Now again, that's only for the next 2 years, so don't get complacent right now and say, wait a minute, you mean between my wife and myself we could give away $10 million? Well, we don't even have $10 million, so I don't have to do any planning at all. Well, guess what? Like Brian said, when we get out to 2013, all of a sudden it's back to $1 million instead of 10. And now, wow, there's a lot of farms when you figure the equipment and the land and everything that I realize it's not $1 million of cash sitting in your checking account or something like that, but it could be worth more than $1 million. And all of a sudden your farm's at risk if you aren't doing that planning.
Okay, so a person might not have $5 or $10 million today, but we're just talking about federal estate taxes right now. There are also state-to-state taxes in some states, like Minnesota, for example. The exemption's only $1 million, and the exemption's not portable. So theoretically, husband and wife, if they didn't set things up right, could only end up with a $1 million exemption by the time it's all said and done if one spouse passes away before the other. That's not very much. The other thing is some states have inheritance tax. So this is not a tax that's charged on the estate. It's a tax that's charged on whoever receives those financial benefits after the person passes away. So inheritance tax and estate tax could be on the state level, and those figures might be completely different than what the federal tax is.
One of the ways that individuals or families could avoid some of these taxes after they die is to give away some of that money or some of that wealth before they die. Now, the government still has taxes and limits on this. They call it the gift tax. If you want to give away property or money while you're still alive, you're allowed to do that. And there's an exemption up to $5 million per person. So you could give away $5 million right now, but now you've reached your limit, and after you're gone, everything will be taxable.
Yeah, but this changed dramatically from what it used used to be. It was $1 million just recently. Now it's $5 million.
Now, I really don't want to confuse things here by talking about too many things, but there is yet another tax that comes into play called the generation skipping transfer tax. I'm not making these names up. That's what it's really called. And what this is for is, let's say you want to pass that money not to a child, but to a grandchild. So you go more than one generation down the line to pass away money. Or let's say you don't necessarily have any kids or don't have any grandkids and you want to give money to someone who's quite a bit younger than you. There's something called a generation skipping transfer tax, because basically instead of giving money to one generation, it getting taxed, and then that generation giving it to the next generation and getting taxed, well, you've skipped that generation, so now the government's going to collect federal estate tax like you passed it on twice. Well, there are obviously a lot of things to think about when it comes to estate planning, and taxes are just one of them. You know, passing on farmland or that kind of thing, which kid gets what different asset. I mean, there's all those things to consider as well. We just wanted to make you aware of some of the changes that happened in Washington at the end of last year that now are the new rules going ahead for a couple of years. These are the things that we have to plan around as far as federal estate taxes, gift taxes, and generation skipping transfer taxes.
Well, speaking of things we have to plan around, we now have to worry about Roundup resistant weeds. Our weed of the week is one of them. We'll talk about it later in the show.